Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you about a topic that I think, obviously it's very interesting to you all because you're here, which is a great thing. But secondarily, it's something that is a topic that is misunderstood tremendously, the thought of our own metabolisms. And I think that each of us, if we were asked, what is your metabolism and is it working, would have a very different answer to that. And maybe by the end of the evening as a goal, there not only would be some clarity around what that word really means, how important it is for us through our whole lifetime, and I'm going to give you 6 secrets, 6 strategies that mobilize an individual metabolism and move it to a place of being optimal, of being fully functional, and of generating a significant amount of vitality. Now, that's a tall order. So we're going to navigate this using a variety of techniques. And I first want to just orient all of us together to some basic concepts. Unfortunately, the concept of what's called the caloric equation is what we were all raised on. It's ingrained in our DNA. And it goes something like this. Essentially, we're to look somehow at the calories that we're putting in. And then we're somehow to be looking at how much energy we're expending, how much we're exercising, how much we're moving around. And that has its net effect on our outcome, on our weight, which is one of the ways that we're barometrically measuring this. Almost all of us have a scale at home. So we use the equation backward. We step on the scale, and we see that our weight has potentially gone down. So we say that we've done well. And if the weight goes up, we think, well, maybe I've taken my calories and I've taken too many in, and I haven't expended too many out, and what I'm left with is too much weight. So here's what I've got to do. We all do some version of this. We all then eventually say, well, I'll just reduce the number of calories that are going in. Everybody with me? Simple, right? It's math. I will then expend more stuff. I'll walk more, I'll run more, I'll sweat more, I'll do something more, and that will cause me to lose weight. Does this work? Well, yes and no. I mean, there's some simple math here, but what it's ignoring is this notion of our metabolic rate. Our metabolic rate is, a good way to think about this is like a little furnace that's engaged inside of us all the time. And that furnace is either working well or it's not working well. That's really what your metabolism is. It's this rate of movement of energy inside of us. Now, if you're sitting there and you're clipping along with a relatively moderate or medium metabolic rate, and you go ahead and you wind up diminishing the calories that go in, do you know what happens to that furnace? It dries up. It dries up is what it does. It stops functioning. The less fuel we put in, the furnace begins to die down, just like a wood-burning stove. And therefore, it makes our metabolic rate go even lower. That's not such a good thing. So the entire caloric equation, it really is nonsense. It's really not a very effective way of being able to guide ourselves. Now, you could all be saying, well, I don't do that. And I would believe you, except how many of us have gained weight and lost weight and gained weight and lost weight and gained weight? We've done the yo-yo, right? Back and forth and back and forth. So there's some frustration there. The other element is, even though you may not think you're using the caloric equation, when you go ahead and you look at a variety of foods, right? You think, well, I'm not going to eat fat because I get fat from fat. What you're really doing is using the caloric equation. You're really saying to yourself, hey, if I eat something that has a lot of fat, it's going to increase the number of calories in. I don't have enough calories going on in terms of my expenditure, I'm going to gain weight. So this notion of watching our fat going in is really a version of the caloric equation. And you may not overtly think that you're looking at this caloric equation, but a lot of us glance at this silly little label, right? We're like, oh, I can't eat that. And what we're really saying is, too many calories, the fat contains a lot of calories, I'm not going to eat that because it's going to make me fat. So it's a variety of permutations of this that have spawned the entire weight loss industry. We have every possible diet strategy known to mankind available. We have people that are eating low fat, and some that are eating low carb, and some that are eating vegetarian, and some that are eating high protein, some that are eating just fruit, some that are eating just air, and is it really working? I'll tell you how we know that it's not working. We've got huge investments in major brands, the Jenny Craigs, the Weight Watchers, the Nutrisystems. People are out there to try to guide us and help us where we're failing. It's a big industry. It's $20 billion a year. That's the gross national product of many, many small countries in this world of ours. By the way, how effective long-term are these? The average person on these programs loses 6.5 pounds over an entire 2-year span. It's a loss. I'm glad there's a loss there. Does it really stay off? The facts are it doesn't really stay off of these individuals. Why? Because the basic premise is missing. How do you increase your metabolism? How do you make that furnace stronger? And more importantly, how do you identify the 6 stumbling blocks, the 6 roadblocks to ineffective metabolism and overcome them? We need help. We need a way to pull ourselves away from the scale, to pull ourselves away from stepping on something that at the very least gives us some poor guidance about what we're supposed to eat, and at the worst gives us some sort of influence on our own self-esteem. So we want to move away from that. So where do we move to? We move to a bigger concept known as body composition. If you're going to fall asleep at any element tonight, don't do it now. This is the most important part, okay? So if you see somebody nodding off, just hit them with an elbow. Wouldn't you agree, when you look around the world, we are all different shapes and sizes? Even if you're a man, a woman, we all are basically built differently. We have different amounts of muscle, different amounts of fat, different amounts of bone, different amounts of water. We are made differently and shaped differently. The important principle is this. If I was able to take anyone here today that wanted to lose some weight, and I brought them up here in front of me, and I had a magic hand that could reach into them and pull out an entire handful of fat. Wouldn't that be cool? Like no surgery, I'm just like one of those Philippine psychic surgeons. I just go in and I take it out. And then I was able to magically replace it with a handful of muscle. What would happen to their weight when we got back on the scale? Go up. Pound for pound, mass for mass, shape for shape, there's a greater weight associated with muscle than there is with fat. Now, this doesn't make a lot of sense in some level, right? Because then you'd say, well, if I'm going to get healthier, what do I have to do, like gain 100 pounds? That's not true. But in the process of rebuilding, we've got to stop looking at the scale initially. We've got to stop using the barometer of what the easiest thing is. Sometimes the easiest thing is the most misleading thing to use. Let me make it a little bit more straightforward. You are losing weight as you sit here right now. Some of you are saying, I think I'm gaining weight, so I sit here right now. You're not. You're expending energy. You are a big furnace. As long as you're alive, your cells are busy chewing up energy. Your cells are busy metabolizing. Now, that metabolic rate, many of us think, has to do primarily with something like our physical activity. That's what most of us think. Oh, I got to go do something because I want to get my metabolic rate up. I have to be active. But looking at the chart, the majority of your metabolic rate, the energy, the calories expended or used in the course of a day, are not coming from physical activity. By the way, I like the little gray sliver. That's my favorite way to expend energy. That's the energy we use to digest food. That is my favorite way to lose weight, which is to eat. But look at the other element of this, the BMR, your basal metabolic rate. Basal just means when you're pretty much at rest, baseline, you're not excessively active. What is your basal metabolic rate? That, day and night, is your furnace. Your basal metabolic rate is the rate at which your body is constantly burning up a variety of calories. So, focusing on increasing the basal metabolic rate is the most important strategy that we can do. So if we get on the scale and we see that we're not the right body composition for us or the right weight for us, there really are two paths we can take. We can take a path that is going to be ineffective for us. An ineffective path is one that ultimately will reduce muscle and fat. What we want to do is reduce fat but build healthy amounts of muscle in the process. And this is a little trickier than it sounds. But when we look at the composition of men and women, they're decidedly different. There's more muscle mass in men. There's more fat in women that helps support hormonal levels. There's a difference. However, there are optimal levels for both men and for women. So let's use an example. We've got a woman here, and this woman is essentially 30 years old. She's 120 pounds, and she weighs about 5'2", 5'3". And she is sitting here with an internal basal metabolic rate that's determining her body mass index, her overall weight as determined by her height and relative to her height. And her resting metabolism is 1230 kilocalories. She's sitting there with 22% body fat. She can go about some strategies that ultimately help her to increase her resting metabolic rate from 1230 to 1264. If she does that, her body fat percentage will be reduced from 22 to 15. She will maintain the exact same weight, but she will be lean. She will have energy, and she will be healthy. But she will have the same weight that she started out with. If you are going to use your scale to steer and guide whether you're moving further or closer from being healthy, you're going to be trapped. Because you could literally be more healthy like this woman. You could literally stay at the same weight, but increase your resting metabolism and have a lower percentage of body fat. And by the way, if you have the same weight, what is it that's making up all that weight? Your muscle. She's exchanged fat for muscle. She's done the miracle I was just talking about, but her weight has stayed the same. Now, you could all say also, I'm at the same weight I was when I got married. I wish we could say all that, all of us, but some of us say that. If this woman stayed at the same weight, but she ultimately did some strategies like starving herself to try to lose weight and her resting metabolism diminished, her body fat will increase. Her overall look and feel will not feel right. She won't feel fit and lean, but she will have exactly the same weight. Take your scales and throw them away in order to boost your metabolism. You cannot depend upon a faulty instrument to take you in a particular direction. That same scale will read the same three figures, whether you are moderately healthy, moving towards obesity, or moving towards vitality, leanness, and health. What use is the scale? It'll tell you the same number. You step on it one month and you do something different, you step on it the next month, you're like, it's the same. You have no idea what's going on inside of you. You can't determine that from the scale itself. So we are going to explore the 6 different strategies that I'm aware of that have a direct, measurable, and positive influence on our metabolism, both in a positive way and potentially in a negative way if we don't tend to these things. Now, these are new concepts for a lot of us, so we're going to have a learning model, and every one of these concepts tonight we're going to explore in exactly the same way. I'm going to first help us to understand basically what the concept means. Then we're going to use some strategies to figure out if you suspect this is a problem for yourself. How would you know if any of these things were an issue? You're going to leave today with the tool that's going to help you to evaluate that. That tool is in your packet. It is a very sophisticated questionnaire that helps determine by section which of these problems you may have. So I'm going to tell you that a particular issue is section 1, 5, and 7. And if you start to score fairly high in sections 1, 5, and 7, you probably have this problem. The next follow-up to that, of course, is if I suspect that there's a problem, how do I really know? Who's going to tell me this and how will I figure it out? And I will tell you exactly what to do to go back to your primary care physicians, whoever you're consulting with, to find out if there's a real issue here, and I'll tell you the questions to ask and the tests to be run. And then I'm also going to give you the way to solve it in case it comes up positive. So we're going to understand it. We're going to figure out, leaving tonight, you'll have a tool that you can figure out if you really fall in any of these categories, that they should be investigated. I'll tell you how to follow up with someone to investigate it, and I'm going to tell you how to treat it. Is it fair? So you just have to stay awake and pay attention, and we're going to have it all handled tonight. We have these 6 different areas to explore today, and we'll start out with one of my favorite, which is one that is oftentimes overlooked as a cause of diminished metabolism and increased bad weight, inflammatory weight. And it's called intestinal inflammation, and it is much more common than you think. To understand intestinal inflammation, we have to understand that there is a vacuum cleaner system of our body. It's called the lymphatic system. And basically, it's a big central vac. It's basically out there like a reverse feeder hose in the garden. It's sucking stuff back from the peripheral, the outside tissues, back into the circulation. And in the process of sucking it all back in, it's cleaning it. So it's a huge detoxifying system. It's a huge return system for garbage. And one of the areas that contains the most amount of all of this lymph fluid and lymph nodes is the area right around your stomach, right around the intestines, right around your digestive tract. Anybody want to venture a guess why it is that we're busy looking at the intestinal tract to try to be vigilant? Why is our body screening all of the material that we put into our mouth? Because the single greatest place that we put something dirty and bad and caustic into our body is not our skin or our breathing in. It's descending down with every bite that we take into the intestinal tract. It's filled with bacteria, it's filled with garbage. When it finally gets deep into the intestines, it's like floating along shag carpet. And impregnated into the shag carpet itself are little sensors, little areas that are intelligent. They're busy figuring out what that stuff is that you just put in your mouth. Is it broccoli or is it a Big Mac? These little sensors are figuring this out. And when they're figuring it out, they're telling your immune system, your lymphatic system, whether to attack it or they're telling your body to bring it in as a nutrient. Now, this all works generally well for most of us. The issue is that there is in many individuals a problem with that shag carpet. The shag carpet itself has gotten damaged. Alcohol, toxins, sugars, bad foods, all of these things have hurt this normal intestinal barrier, and it's allowed that shag carpets to tear and to microscopically separate, pouring a variety of very bad things into your bloodstream and into the lymphatics that surround your gastrointestinal tract. Now, when your lymphatic system is surrounded by garbage because of this condition, which is known as leaky gut, the whole immune system takes over. It's kind of like getting a splinter and your body gets extraordinarily inflamed. The gut gets inflamed. So when you have this condition, you eat a bite, you start to swell. I have had people, more than a few, tell me, I can't believe it, but my stomach, I could literally watch my stomach expand and contract. Something is going on there. It's not weight, the way that you think it is, but there's so much water in these inflammatory fluids. If you ever get an infection on an arm or a hand and you watch the amount of swelling that's there, there's a lot of fluid that accumulates there. That's what the body does. White blood cells and fluid all accumulate in the gastrointestinal area, and it causes significant swelling. When it does, it produces some known symptoms. People who have this tend to have very rapid weight changes. From one day to the next, they can swing 2 to 15 pounds. Now that doesn't make any sense unless it's this condition. Nothing else metabolically moves like that. You could eat the biggest, gorge at the hugest unhealthy meal, and you're not going to swing as far as what I'm reporting, where it goes up and down from day to day. It oftentimes is accompanied by bloating, where an individual is describing indigestion, diarrhea, flatulence, constipation. There's something gastrointestinally that they know is not working well for them. And there can be systemic reactions after eating. You eat something and suddenly your vision blurs, or you can't think very clearly, or your joints hurt, or your muscles become a little bit weak, or you get nauseated or diarrhea after taking certain nutritional supplements. Things that are supposed to be good for you have a paradoxical response in your body. Or you look in the toilet. If you do that when you're done, you're like, wow, I don't remember eating that yesterday. You can see undigested food in there, and that doesn't make a lot of sense either. And also, those in the room with autoimmune conditions, this is oftentimes a problem associated with autoimmunity. Rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, lupus, erythematosus, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, they're all associated, these autoimmune conditions, multiple sclerosis, with leaky gut, with this problem. Now, if you tend to suspect this is a problem, categories 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 and 6, they're your best friends at figuring this out. When you start to score relatively high in one or more of these categories, this is something that really should be investigated, because we're not supposed to have substantial symptoms in this particular area of our body. Now, if you suspect it, how do you figure it out for real? How do you know that there's an issue? Well, there's a really simple screening test in your urine called a urinary indican test. And you can see undigested waste products showing up as chemical residue in the urine itself. So it's pretty easy. You collect urine for 24 hours and you have it chemically processed properly, and you can see whether this is demonstrating that an issue exists. Your blood shows a variety of issues, even minor elevations above normal of the inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein or your SED rate, simple markers that are done every single routine physical, including alkaline phosphatase, ferritin, blood urea nitrogen, even iron and anemias like B12 and iron anemias are all signs that there might be intestinal inflammation. And lastly, and probably one of the best, is to look at the stool itself. Nobody really wants to do this, but when you are able to collect stool and send it to a laboratory that slices it and dices it and gets it into a microbiologist's hands, where it can be evaluated to determine if there are the signs in there, in the stool itself, it will show us clear signs that there's a problem in the gastrointestinal tract. This is how we know. That's the only way really to know for certain, is to look at some testing to figure this out. But much of this testing is done on you every annual physical. It's just taking the information, marrying it up with your symptoms, and then determining that this problem actually exists. Now, if you wind up determining that you have intestinal inflammation, if you wind up knowing that there is an accumulation and residue and there might be a problem with the integrity of your gastrointestinal tract, what can you do about it? How do you go about healing yourself? I do this by something called the 4 R's. My mentor, Dr. Jeff Bland, developed and taught legions of doctors how to go through a methodical program to repair the gut lining. One of them, the first element of that, is to remove. You find out if there's any bad bugs in there. You take away the yeast, you take away the fungus, you take away the bacteria, and you take away any viruses, and the gut starts to get a lot happier just after the first stage. And there's simple natural products that do this very effectively. There's berberine, which is golden seal. It's very effective. Grapefruit seed extract and colloidal silver are very, very effective tools at minimizing the bad bugs that are in the gastrointestinal tract. By the way, if you go ahead and you do the stool culture, this part always blows my mind. If you do stool culture with the right laboratory, the laboratory will take the bad bugs they find from you, and they will expose it in their laboratory to these items. to determine which of these items is most effective at killing off the bugs that are inside you, not in a textbook, not in a 1,000-person study, in you. That's personalized medicine. And it's really a wonderful way to do this because then there's no guessing. Then you're not trying one thing and trying another thing and trying another thing to see what works. You'll know what works before you even embark on the right program. The second of the 4 R's, after removing the bad bugs, is we have to repair that lining. You saw the video. Seeing all of that garbage just penetrate through into the bloodstream and the surrounding lymphatics is kind of scary. So you want to close up the holes in the screen door. And the way that we do that is use a very powerful substance known as L-glutamine. It's an amino acid, and it's a primary fuel and restorative compound for the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. We want to replace any missing enzymes. That's the third R. And lastly, we want to re-inoculate. That simply means we want to put some probiotics back into the gut, because if we've taken all the bad bugs out, we want to totally fill the gut with really good bugs. And in doing that, it leaves happy, it leaves healthy, and weight drops dramatically. If it has accumulated as inflammatory agents around the gut, the belly goes away. It's kind of cool. It's really almost miraculous how it works. So intestinal inflammation is the number one reason why there can be very rapid weight gain and weight loss and weight gain and weight loss over the course of days with accompanying gastrointestinal symptoms. But there's another very common way that we sabotage our metabolism, which is to not take proper care of our thyroid gland. So poor thyroid function is another area that tends to slow metabolism down. Our thyroid gland is sitting like a little bow tie right in the very center of our throat here. It's pretty superficial. If you were trained properly, you can actually feel the outer lobes poking out on either side. And the thyroid gland's role is to secrete what I'm going to call an intermediary hormone, which is thyroid hormone. It's called T4. Now, I use the word intermediary because that just means it's not the big kahuna. It's not the most important thyroid hormone. We're going to get to that in a moment. When the thyroid stops being able to effectively work, we call that primary hypothyroidism. It's not secreting the right amount of hormone. Now, one of the reasons that happens is something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's a fancy word for the immune system attacking your thyroid gland, kind of the same way that the immune system attacks the joints with rheumatoid arthritis. This is not what we're going to talk about today because it's an extraordinarily complex area. And it's not the most common, by the way. It's relatively uncommon, but we can pick it up and diagnose it if it's present. I'll tell you the most common form of hypothyroidism is called secondary hypothyroidism. Another word for this is underconversion. So let's do some biochemistry together, all right? Up in your brain, right between your eyes and back in your brain, halfway, is a little bulb called the pituitary gland. And your pituitary gland is kind of like the chef with his thumb or finger in the soup, constantly tasting the soup of your bloodstream, saying, is there enough of this? Is there enough of this hormone? Is there enough of this? And because it's this wonderful master gland, it basically is secreting a bunch of commands. It tastes the soup and says, more salt. It tastes the soup and says, go urinate. It tastes the soup and says, thyroid, you need to work a little bit more. And that's exactly what it does. If you've ever had a routine blood test done, they're measuring something called TSH. And that means thyroid stimulating hormone. It's pretty straightforward. Now you're all like doctors because you got it. TSH as thyroid stimulating hormone means when the pituitary says, hey, that thyroid's really underperforming, it secretes something called thyroid stimulating hormone, and it gives the thyroid a kick. And it says, go ahead, start secreting more of what you secrete. Now, this is the funny part. The thyroid basically secretes predominantly something called T4. There's a fancy name for it, but the colloquial name is T4 because it's a molecule of tyrosine, that's an amino acid, the T, and it's got 4 iodines attached to it, T4. Now, T4 is not the metabolically active form of thyroid hormone. It's pretty weak. Now, it's weak by design because if your thyroid was busy kicking out really, really strong gasoline all the time, you wouldn't even know when to stop. It's not that smart. It only knows how to manufacture. It sends T4 out into the tissues. It sends it out towards the muscles, the liver, the kidneys to a little degree. And if they need more metabolism, if in the liver's opinion or your muscle's opinion, you need to get up and go, it will pluck one of those thyroid iodines off and make T3, which is like pulling the pin on a grenade. That's your metabolism occurring. The conversion of T4 to T3 produces metabolically active activities inside of your system. Now, let me ask you a question. If you go to your doctor and he sees that your TSH level is elevated, which means you got to stimulate your thyroid, and then determines, hey, this person has a low T4, that's the problem, what are they going to give you? They're going to give you T4. How well will that help you to convert T4 into T3 if the problem is really in your liver, in your kidneys, and your muscles? Not very well. And in fact, you're going to be over-revving your system, and you might get a metabolic boost for a brief period, and then it's going to sag again, and the doctor's going to go, oh, I know what to do. I'm going to give you more T4. It's easy. Just right, take it, and you go, oh, thank goodness. You take a pill, and it's like double the dosage. You're like, wow, this is working. Wow, it's really starting to slow down. I don't understand what's happening. And you're going in this vicious cycle. The real issue here is that they're not addressing the conversion of T4 into T3. And the most provocative statement I'm going to tell you is even if you have a weak, weeny little thyroid gland and it's not kicking a lot of T4 out, if you are very efficient out in your systems at converting T4 into T3, it doesn't matter. Once you have enough T3 in your system, your metabolism goes up. So how do we go ahead and get T3 going? How do you even suspect it? If you're constipated, if you tend towards depression, if you have dry hair or hair loss, dry skin, if you have fatigue or greater sensitivity to cold than those people around you, and if you have a slower heart rate and unexplained weight gain or difficulty losing weight, or if you have carpal tunnel syndrome, these are all related to as symptom clusters for this hypothyroidism, especially the underconversion of T4 into T3. So you're going to look at category 14. That's your one. If you have those symptoms and you're kind of lighting up a lot of yeses and higher numbers in category 14, that's your ticket to say, it may not have been picked up yet, but I'm going to get somebody to figure this out for me because my thyroid is probably involved. Now, how do you move from suspecting this to knowing this? How does it become certain for you? Get the right laboratory tests done. Don't settle for the easy one your doctor circles on the lab requisition with the last 100 patients, most of which have thyroid problems that he's missed or she's missed anyway. You want to have specific tests done besides TSH. You want to have something called free T4 and free T3, and you might as well throw in some thyroid antibodies to figure out if your immune system is really a problem for you or not. Now, here's the deal with free T4 and free T3. Most of the circulating hormone in your body is called total hormone. Total hormone just means it's a mixture of some stuff, and what it's a mixture of is hormone that is floating around free and doing the backstroke and very metabolically active, and hormone that is bound up to protein. Now, what's this whole protein thing? There's a lot of protein in our bloodstream. One of the basic forms that it's in is called albumin. And you've seen albumin in an egg. It makes a lot of texture, doesn't it? And albumin in your bloodstream, one of its roles is to essentially make the bloodstream have its consistency that it does. It's not water. That blood flows, but it flows like blood. It's got some consistency to it. That's the protein that's in it, and we need it. Without sufficient protein, we'll die. That protein is pretty sticky stuff. I have an egg almost every morning. It isn't the easiest thing to get off of the plate after I'm done. It's sticky. It's very, very adherent. Now, you've got hormones floating around in your bloodstream too. And those hormones are like specialized keys with very, very specific teeth. And those keys are looking for a lock. The thyroid hormone keys are looking for receptors on the liver, on your muscles, and your kidneys in order to push themselves like a key into the lock and turn on your metabolism. When thyroid hormone floats around in your bloodstream, a lot of the protein globs onto it. Imagine taking a key and putting a bunch of super glue on it. Let it dry and try to make it work in your car door. Is it going to work? It's going to maybe be able to jam in there, but it's certainly not going to turn all the tumblers and make it work. Hormones that have proteins globbed onto them are inactive. And by the way, 98% of the hormone, the thyroid hormone, in your bloodstream is inactive. 98% is inactive. So you're only looking at a very, very small percentage of functioning hormone. Now, if you're running routine blood tests and you're just doing cookie cutter medicine with people, you basically are ordering lots of total T3s and total T4s. Most of the time you're ordering a total T4. You don't even know about T3 and its role. If you're ordering a total T4 and a patient's real issue is that they have half the amount of free hormone, that 2% has gone to 1%. How much does that really affect the overall amount of total hormone? It reduces it only by a fraction. So you look at it and you say, your hormone levels are fine. You have got a great thyroid that's functioning. How do you know? How do you know my thyroid is functioning if you've measured the total amount of hormones and they're still fitting inside of this reference range that you could drive a Mack truck through? You don't know. But when you selectively measure free T4 and free T3, suddenly an entire world opens up because you're seeing what really matters. You're seeing the hormone levels that fit like the key in the lock and they're not globbed up with super glue. And if those keys are diminished by 50%, there's a problem. And we need to address the problem. Now, how do we do that? We measure the unbound or free T3. If you leave with nothing else today relative to thyroid and you have a concern about it because you're elevated in that category, make sure your doctor is measuring unbound or free T3 levels. Now, what can I possibly do to treat this? First of all, keep the thyroid gland working well. There are certain substances that impair the way the thyroid makes thyroid hormone. Now, these actually don't look really bad to us, do they? You're looking at bok choy and you're looking at broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cabbage. These are the crucifers, cauliflower and kale and all of these great things. Now, I am not telling you not to eat these things. But number one, cook them a little bit. When you cook these things the slightest little bit, you steam them a little bit, you stir fry a little bit, you bake them a little bit, you make most of the goitrogenic activity of it go away. The chemical in these items that slows your thyroid down melts away under a little bit of heat. You don't have to cook it like my grandmother used to cook vegetables, but cook them a little bit. If you are only eating lots and lots and lots of raw veggies, and these are the veggies you eat, you could be impairing your thyroid function, thinking you're doing something pretty good for yourself. Second of all, go ahead and supplement a little bit with iodine to make the thyroid stronger. And there really are a couple of iodines. There's iodine and iodide, and you need a combination of the two of those. One of the trade names that is very effective for this is called iodoral. It's really, really popular. But it's a mixture of iodine and iodide, which are two very important functioning elements of iodine. But we also want to supplement with two key, cheap, simple minerals, selenium and zinc. The reason we want to supplement with some selenium and some zinc, do you remember how T4 leaves your thyroid? It goes out into your liver and your muscles and your kidneys, and it pulls, when needed, one of those iodines off and makes T4 turn into T3, and like the pin of a grenade, metabolism occurs, it only does so with sufficient zinc and selenium. Those of us that are deficient in these items, and many of us are, you might say to me, well, I don't think I have a mineral deficiency. Nobody's ever told me that before. You may not have even thought you had impaired thyroid function until you filled out that particular category. But if you are thinking there's an issue and you measure there's an issue, one of the things you may want to do immediately is start to supplement with selenium and supplement with zinc. It can be very effective for you. And maybe the most important thing you can do is to avoid halogens. Now, I'm not talking about lighting fixtures. Halogens are a certain type of chemical. They're very, very prevalent in the environment. If you're a swimmer, if you use a hot tub, or if you drink city water, you may be exposing yourself over and over and over again to one of these halogens. And by the way, every day, every minute is a battle on your thyroid gland between iodine and these halogens. The more you submerge yourself in water with chlorine, the more you drink chlorinated water, the more you drink water with fluoride in it, and the more that you expose yourself to a hot tub that has been sanitized with bromine, you are basically just telling your thyroid gland, look, don't take that nice molecule of iodine that you took in and make thyroid hormone. Here, have some chlorine and do something with it. Here, have some bromine, and by the way, brush your teeth and have a blast with fluoride. And your thyroid is sitting there just scratching its head like, what am I supposed to do with these? But every single molecule it tries to make of T3 or T4, it needs iodine to do that. The 3 or the 4 is iodine, and you may not be making T3 or T4. You may be making a molecule that has lots of fluoride on it, or bromine, or chlorine associated with it. Besides looking at thyroid function, I want you to consider your poor little under-attended to adrenal glands. Because your adrenal glands are oftentimes discussed, mostly misunderstood, and lastly, rarely cared for the way that they should be. Sitting back on top of your kidneys, everybody take your hands and put them back right underneath your rib cage back here. It's low. You ever have really low kidney pain? It's back here. Just on top of your fingers is where the little adrenal glands sit. They're small. They're about the shape of almonds and about the size of almonds sitting on top of the kidneys themselves. And one of the roles, a primary role of the adrenal glands is to secrete the hormone cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Cortisol is the hormone that protects us. It's inborn. It is there as an element throughout evolutionary history to protect animals from danger. Now, one of the books that I really love the most is written by a PhD at Stanford named Robert Zampolsky. And he wrote a book with a really provocative title to it. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And you're like, I don't even know if I want to read the book, but aren't they cute? You just look at them and you're like, okay, I got to figure out why these things don't get ulcers. Let me tell you about a zebra's day in case you've never hung out for long with a zebra. A zebra's sitting on the Serengeti plain, right? They're kind of hanging out in herds. They're basically eating grass. They're basically turning grass into fuel. Do you have any idea how much grass they have to eat to supply that big, muscular, zebra-like body of theirs? That's what they do. They wake up and they eat grass. The head is down and they're eating. Now, there's other things on the Serengeti's plains that are predators. Let's pretend one of them is called a tiger. They love hanging out in the low grass, and every day they're going to have to score a meal. And their happy meal is zebras. So they're sitting there on the edge of the plain, and the zebras are basically in this herd, head down, eating, until one of them, the little ear goes up, right? So they know something's up, right? And somehow, through mass communication, the herd starts running. Why? Because someone's going to die. One of them is going to die. This is not the stress of, oh, I got audited by the IRS. This is not, whoop, my wife left with the plumber. This is, someone's going to die. They run as fast as they can, survival of the fittest. The slowest one, the weakest one is going to die. And they do. The herd mourns, they have a little wake, they move on, and they're eating about 5 minutes later. They're not sitting there with ulcers. They're opened up in autopsy, and there's no sign of stress-related illness. If every day you woke up, by the way, and one of us, we're all traveling together, we're having a great time, and every day one of us was gonna die, picture that for a second. That's like the craziest thing known to mankind, right? That would be very, very bad. We would have stress-related illness. We'd have cardiovascular disease, bone loss from all this cortisol, ulcers, our brains would turn to mush, we wouldn't remember anything because cortisol is an amnesiac, we'd be a mess. Our blood sugar would be crazy. None of that. Do you know why zebras don't get ulcers? Dr. Zampolsky says. You ready? They don't worry about it. They're not worried at all about this. They're not replaying the story. The moment you get the IRS notice, I guarantee you the entire story of your life unfolds in your mind and permutates until you're finally face to face with this person, and whatever happens, happens. But what has happened in all those days is you have replayed a variety of scenarios that never existed. They were a fantasy. They were something we thought of happening. Most of us spend our lives not like the herd with real danger. We spend our lives in imaginary danger, imaginary bad things, or worse, our history that we can't remember anyway, but we have embellished and go over and over again. I rarely replay the good stuff. Do you replay the good stuff a lot? It's the really hard stuff. It's like, God, did I really say that? I can't believe I did that. I can't believe they did that to me. And you just go over and over and over this. You're not here. I'm not here. Most of us aren't here most of the time. We're in the past and we're in the future, and those are complete fantasies. And they're here. They're eating and they're here. They don't get ulcers. They don't have runaway cortisol levels. If you suspect that there's a problem, look at the symptoms that include lightheadedness while rising quickly. If you get up and you go, the knees go weak when you get up quickly, or your vision changes, it's a very strong sign that your adrenals are depleted. Why? One of the roles of the adrenal glands is that when we go from sitting to standing, our blood flows downward toward our feet, and our brain is going to pass out if we don't do something. So there's a mechanism. The mechanism is that there's sensors inside our cardiovascular system in our neck, senses the pressure going down in the brain and says, whoa, in a split second, adrenals, you need to kick out a little bit of cortisol. Adrenals kick out a few drops of cortisol. In that split second, makes blood pressure go up, and we don't pass out. We don't even know there's a problem. If you get up routinely and you go weak at the knees, something's not right with your adrenal glands. They have probably become fatigued. They've probably been overworked for a long time, and they're not functioning the way that they should. If you experience food or salt cravings, like you're sitting there like, I gotta have a pretzel. I'm gonna die if I don't have a pretzel. Like you're really constitutionally craving, especially salt, there may be an issue. If you have weight changes that are predominantly abdominal, you tend to put on abdominal fat, cortisol may be part of the problem. If you're unable to stop, if you're like, I'm going to jump out of my skin if I sit here. What am I doing sitting here? I got so much stuff to do. I got to get up. And you get up and you're moving around and you're, oh man, I'm tired. I got to sit down. I can't sit down. I've got so much to do. And you get up and you're like, you are the constant mercurial force in your household. You may have a problem with the adrenal glands. If you're just plain old tired, you wake up tired, you go through your day tired, and you go to sleep tired, and it never ends, it could be the adrenal glands. And if you have a poor emotional coping ability, that is a very, very nice word for you're just reactive. You know, you have a little bit of something happen and you're volcano. And you're like, where did that come from? That could be the adrenal glands that are giving us a signal that there's an issue. The other really great element about cortisol is that it's an amnesiac. It wipes the slate clean up top here. Why? Because if in every intensely stressful moment, like childbirth, sitting there in the hot tub with my wife 6.5 months ago, she's going through this incredible physical, emotional experience. She looks at me and she says, we will never do this again. Promise me. Okay. And then the baby comes and she looks at me and she says, do you want to have another one? Of course we do. That's cortisol. Wipes every bad thing. If you relived every pain, every push, every ooh of childbirth, we'd all be nuclear families of one child. Never, never, never again. This is a protective mechanism because the pain of these really bad things in our life are so bad that they need to be erased or attenuated in some way. And if you have frequent infections or poor recovery, especially if you have what I call vacation infections, you're working hard, you're saving up this 1 week for a vacation, you get on the plane after working all night, you show up somewhere where they're giving you like this nice little pineapple with the rum drink and it's got the things and flowers and stuff coming out of it and you're taking the sip and then you go, all right, I got to go to the room. Why does that happen very frequently? When we are under stress, the immune system, that was pretty good. The immune system eventually suppresses itself. Cortisol is a suppressor of the immune system. And guess what? When your immune system is suppressed, you don't get infections. Infections get you. They're in there, they're doing the backstroke, you got bacteria, and you got viruses, and you got yeast, and they're having a party because there's no sentinels, there's no police force. Nothing is going on. It's runaway chaos in your body. And you're just thinking you're doing your work. You're working your 12-hour days, you're working hard, you're not getting sick, so you think everything's okay and you can do this. You can sleep 5 or 6 hours, and that's fine for you. And then you're like, well, I'm going to reward myself and take a vacation. Then, when you have that first little drink and your body starts to relax and the cortisol drops and your immune system turns back on and it says, oh my gosh, there's a bacteria and there's a virus and there is yeast and it all gets treated in one fell swoop. Your entire vacation week is taken care of. That's what this is about. The frequent infections and poor recovery from them are this cycle of overwork. Adrenals cause extra cortisol, suppresses your immune system. Then you wind up eventually relaxing and getting an infection, and only to repeat the cycle over and over again. And if you have insomnia, you may not be able to slow down because your cortisol level is just too high. And how in the world could you perform during the day with this high cortisol level? It isn't one event in the day like the zebras, but it's basically a day, an entire day, almost getting eaten in your mind over and over and over again. All of these family issues, business issues, social issues, environmental issues, political issues, you're overwhelmed. And what are you left with? You can't understand why you can't get to sleep at night. You've got a cortisol level floating around like these zebras when they're being chased. Any of them sleeping when they're getting chased? They're not. Cortisol's there to make you go, not to make you relax. Low libido or severe PMS are also very, very strong indicators of sustained high cortisol levels. Look at category 11, look at category 12, pay attention, study these two. If these relate to you, this, I suspect, might be a problem for you. So how do you figure this out? You can have your urine evaluated for the level of chlorine. Now, why does this matter? Because when the adrenals are really, really going strong and hard for a long time, and they begin to fatigue, they start to eat up chloride ions that show very, very low levels of chlorine in the urine. So you want to see whether that exists in there. Second of all, check your blood pressure. Sit down. Chill out for a few minutes. Measure your blood pressure. Stand up quickly. Count to 10 or 20 and measure your blood pressure again. If it goes down, there's an issue. In fact, I would tell you, if it's the same, there's an issue. Because when you go from sitting to standing, your blood pressure should go up 10 to 20 points temporarily. Why? To keep all that blood up in your head. If your blood pressure stays the same, or moreover, if it drops down, there's a problem with the adrenal glands. Have your saliva tested. Again, saliva is a great way of testing a variety of hormones because you're measuring free hormones in saliva. If your doctor is going to test your cortisol and look at it in the blood, it's more difficult to navigate what's going on. But a salivary cortisol test is really cool because you not only get to see the free hormone, you can measure it at the 4 key times throughout the day. Those key times are typically when you wake up in the morning, about noon, around dinner time, and before you go to sleep. Now, the way to read this graph is you want to be up generally in the green zone. This particular patient is waking up feeling energized or fatigued. They are in the toilet. They have about half the level of cortisol they should when they're waking up. Something's not right here. Sleep is off. Stress is probably too high during the day, and there's an issue. And they kind of bobble around their day. But look at the opposite of this one. This individual wakes up with a fairly reasonable amount of cortisol in the morning, right? They get into lunch. Something is making this cortisol level jump through the roof. Right after lunch and right before dinner, something crazy is going on with cortisol. Now, this could be circumstantial. This could be the same business meeting that happens at a certain time in the afternoon. This could be the rush to pick up kids and try to figure out dinner and try to figure out your life and try to figure out all the things that you're doing and run all of the different endeavors that you're doing at the same time. Or you could be eating the wrong thing at lunch and getting a spike of cortisol because it's dinking with your blood sugar, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. There could be a lot of things going on, but I will tell you something. Something's going on here that needs to be investigated. So how do you treat the adrenal glands? How do you take care of them? First of all, one of the best classifications of natural substances to treat the adrenals are called adaptogens. I love the name anyway. It tells you that it's something that helps you adapt. Adaptogens don't make the adrenals go high, and they don't make the adrenals go low. They make the adrenals do better at both. They support the natural function of the adrenals. So I kind of like them because in using them, you're not assuming that a person needs to have their adrenals stimulated all throughout the day or that they need to be suppressed throughout the entire day, but they need some help to gently adapt up and down. And if you find that you get a little bit excited from watching something scary on TV or suspenseful, and you can't slow yourself down from that, you're not adapting. If you wake up in the morning and you can't get yourself going without 36 ounces of Coke, then you probably are, again, not adapting to the waking state. So adaptogens like Asian ginseng, ashwagandha, rhodiola, cordyceps, astragalus, these are very, very powerful traditional herbal supplements that help to cause the adrenal glands to adapt better. I would also engage immediately in something that in any way, shape, or form resembles meditation or regular exercise or yoga, because there is no better way to bleed off extra stress and allow your body to adapt than sequester yourself for 20 to 60 minutes every day, 3 times a week, 2 times a week, something, and let yourself calm down from all of this. And find a way of regulating your blood sugar. We're going to talk about the effect of blood sugar on the adrenal glands in a little bit. make sure you get some sleep. Now, if you are a lucky person that knows how to sleep, like your body can get to sleep, but you're not giving it enough sleep, it's like I have too much to do, that miniseries is on, I gotta watch it, I can't not watch that thing, I've gotta stay up that extra hour or two, even though I know that it's less sleep than my body really needs. Shame on you. Because there's a lot of people that can't sleep very well. And I tell them like this, go ahead and sleep, and you're looking at me like the deer in the headlights, which is, I can't sleep, that's the problem. That has to do with the other adaptogenic functions or roles of the adrenal glands. They need to be treated. But sleep when you can, and sleep long, and sleep hard, and protect your sleep with sound, protect your sleep with light. Make sure you're taking good care of your sleep. The fourth key area to look at when you're trying to understand how to boost your metabolism and normalize your body composition is to look at your blood sugar. And the element of blood sugar dysregulation that has the greatest relationship to this topic of body composition is called insulin resistance. Normally, when we consume food, a lot of it is converted into carbohydrate. A lot of it is converted into sugar. Why? Because sugar is the primary currency of energy in the body. It will eventually be transformed, used very, very successfully. If you wouldn't mind, your foot is doing like puppets. Yeah, it's really cool. But if you could do a flying bird, that would be very, very cool. Sugar that floats around in your bloodstream is not the same as feeding your cells, though. When you are feeding your bloodstream, you've got part of the picture covered, but not the entire picture. It's like having food delivered to your door, but not quite getting it into the house to feed your family. Blood sugar is not the same as cellular sugar. In order to get blood sugar into the cells, we need the hormone insulin. It's secreted by the pancreas. It's one of those things that acts like a key and a lock, and it opens up all the doors to allow blood sugar to get into your cells. Now, when we are properly secreting the right amount of insulin from the pancreas, that's an organ right around the center of your abdomen, and when we are receptive to that insulin, glucose eventually gets metabolized. But there's lots and lots of us that don't have a function this way. We have something called insulin resistance. Our bodies, our muscles, our cells, our brains are not receptive to the triggering influences of insulin. They're much less than they should be. And because insulin doesn't act like a friend, it doesn't open the doors to allow blood sugar to get into the cells, blood sugar begins to build up inside the bloodstream. And moreover, the cells starve. This is the paradox. Insulin resistance causes weirdness in the body that is multifactorial. It spreads across multiple systems. When you start to have insulin resistance, first of all, it starts to plug up the arteries. It starts to cause atherosclerosis. It also causes vessels themselves to have some sort of resistance to them, so the blood pressure goes up in an individual. We start to put on excess weight in what I call the Milwaukee goiter. When you drink a lot of beer and it starts going to your belly, that essentially is a very, very telltale sign of insulin resistance. It also disables the immune system, starts to deposit fat into the liver, makes your pancreas generally unhappy, and unfortunately is the leading cause of dementia, including Alzheimer's dementia, is insulin resistance. We used to think it was like aluminum and weird stuff going on. The neurofibrillary tangles associated with Alzheimer's dementia turns out are a subset, a form of insulin resistance of the brain. How do you know this? When you have a person that has Alzheimer's dementia, take a big tablespoonful of coconut oil, stick it in their mouth, and bang, for a brief period of time, the lights come back on. Why? Because coconut oil is a medium chain triglyceride. It doesn't need insulin to power the brain. It's like spraying carburetor fluid into a car that isn't getting gas. Will it run for a long time? No, but you'll get the car started for a couple sputters and spurts, and the brain will get started and sputter and spurt. But it's not the solution. The solution is to treat the insulin resistance. The solution is to treat yourself before you start to damage and starve the cells consistently of blood sugar. The problem is we get programmed. We get programmed into anything that says low fat, back to the energy caloric equation. And we say, wow, who knew that a Pop-Tart could make me thin? It's low fat. I can't tell you how many people have told me, I eat low fat. Do you know how much garbage is low fat and full of sugar? Will this lessen the fat of your body? No. So why in the world do we care anything about fat? It's hyperbolic, right? You're sitting here and you're looking at something that says low fat, and you know that you look at this and you're going to gain weight. And yet somehow there's a disconnect. And your brain goes, well, low fat, it's got to be all right, so you eat it. Can't tell you, what are those Snackwell cookies? Those are the ones with the best marketing, right? Because of the low fat. Just having a Snackwell, it's not just low fat, it's low fat. It's low fat in there, but it's big fat in here, because it's going to change the way your blood sugar functions in your body. How do you suspect if you have insulin resistance? First of all, the really bad things of insulin resistance is that it's oftentimes silent even from your doctors. The beginning of insulin resistance, the blood sugar doesn't change. Insulin keeps getting secreted to a large degree from the pancreas. The body is really resistant to it, but blood sugar doesn't quite go up yet. So it's a silent problem. But if you start to experience fatigue after meals, if you're the person that pushes away from the table and then goes, where's my chair? That's a telltale sign. You've just put energy into your body. Why in the world, in a normal person, would you now want to go have nappy time? It doesn't make any sense. Something's wrong. If you crave sweets after you eat, you're like done with the plate. All these colors, all these textures, there's a good combination of everything. And then you finish and you go, I just need that little bit of chocolate to finish the meal off. That's insulin resistance. If you have delayed hunger after waking, you do your evening meal, you're done by 7 o'clock, maybe the snacky time stuff is done by 8, and then you go to sleep and you wake up, that's 12 hours, and you're not hungry. And maybe 9 o'clock comes around, 10 o'clock, 14 hours, 10:30, you're kind of looking at the refrigerator, and by 11 o'clock, maybe 15, 16 hours after you've eaten last, the brain is starting to say, well, maybe I'm a little bit hungry right now. Something's not right. That's insulin resistance. Your body is probably still figuring out what to do with the meal and the snack of the night before, which is why you're not hungry. But I guarantee you something, if I woke you up middle of the day and I told you I'm not going to feed you for 14 or 15 or 16 hours, you would chew my left arm off. So something's off when we don't wake up and have a hunger. If you have excessive hunger at mealtime, if you start eating finally and then you're like, oh my, I need this. And you just keep going and you're like, I don't even know if I could stop. I'm eating this. Wow, are you finishing yours? And then you're on to someone else's plate. That's a sign of insulin resistance. Frequent urination, as with all issues that are related to blood sugar regulation, can be an issue. Look at category 10. Those are the symptoms associated with insulin resistance. So when you have this problem, you might have issues in that particular area to take a look at. How do you figure this out? You can measure your glucose level, but I will tell you something. Once your glucose level starts going up high enough that your doctor taps you on the shoulder and says, now you're pre-diabetic or now you're diabetic, it's very late in the game. Not unsolvable, but it's pretty late in the game. You have to have a way of discerning this a little bit earlier. The way we do it in the clinic is to look at 2 markers simultaneously. Yes, we look at fasting glucose, but we look at a role of insulin over time, which is called C-peptide. The University of Oxford has developed a really interesting algorithm that I think every physician should be using. And they opened it up, open source, to the world. They have an open source app that has a direct link into this huge database and the algorithm. And when you type in a patient's plasma glucose and either their insulin or their C-peptide, you get really cool measurements. You get a measurement of, first of all, how well the cells of their pancreas are functioning. They're called beta cells, so there's a percent B. This person only has 45% output from the pancreas producing insulin. Not so good. You also get a measurement of their insulin sensitivity, which means how well did the cells listen to the signal of insulin? Isn't this remarkable? Two very simple measurements. Anybody could order this on you, and ultimately will tell you the degree to which you have or don't have insulin resistance. Fast, easy, simple, cheap test to do. Ask for it. Ask for it. And if your doctor doesn't know why you're asking for it, say, look online to the University of Oxford and figure it out. You really should know this. How do you know for sure, besides looking at glucose and this HOMA calculation? Look at something called fructosamine. That's the last roughly 3 weeks of your blood sugar on average. Or look at hemoglobin A1C. That's roughly your last measurement of glucose levels for the last 3 months in your bloodstream. Cool measurements, because now we're not looking at a meal or a day. We're looking at 30 meals, 60 meals, 90 meals that you've had, and can tell generally whether your blood sugar has been too high or too low. And start to look for things like your lipid levels. If your cholesterol level is changing, especially your LDLs are going up relative to your HDLs, if you have high triglycerides, this is not a deficiency of Lipitor. But I will tell you that when your doctor sees your cholesterol at 280, he will or she will go, they can write Lipitor in their sleep. Is it Lipitor? That's what they do all day long. Lipitor. That's not what is causing cholesterol and triglycerides to go up. It's not a deficiency of Lipitor. There's a biochemical process. One of the most common biochemical processes is insulin resistance. It causes the liver to really screw up the way it handles these blood fats. Treat the cause. Don't sit there with a chemical that's going to continue to damage the liver further. Why does your doctor need you back in 30, 60, or 90 days to measure your liver enzymes? Because this stuff hurts the liver. Now, you may not have liver enzymes, which means you may not have elevations of liver enzymes showing that your liver's dying off because of this stuff, but it doesn't mean that your liver's happy. Just because you did the liver test and your doctor said, oh, we can keep you on Lipitor, doesn't mean your liver is happy. It just means your liver's not dying. Find the solution deeper than this pill, potion, powder, or lotion for every single symptom that's out there. How do you treat this? Get on a low glycemic index diet. What the heck does a glycemic index mean? When we eat food, there's two basic classifications, okay? There's food that gets in and raises your blood sugar really quickly. That's called a high glycemic index food. And then there's foods that are low glycemic index. They burn and get into the bloodstream and release their sugar really slowly. Now, I like to camp. Don't get to do it a lot, but I like doing it. When I'm camping, I really am not great at the campfire, okay? Because when I love doing it, but I'm not very good at it, okay? Because I like the big whooshy thing. I like putting all that kindling, right? My wife is very good at campfires, very patient. She's just very amused at me most of the time. Because I'm like, look, I got the fire going. And then in about 2 minutes, what happens? I'm there. I'm trying to make something out of nothing. How much of a fire can you really sustain with kindling? You can't. High glycemic foods are like kindling. They make your blood sugar go up really quickly, but it comes down really quickly. Low glycemic foods are like oak. They burn really slowly. So how do you center your diet on foods that have a more favorable glycemic index? Well, first of all, you don't want to be consuming a lot of potatoes. Potatoes are one of the most highly glycemic foods. These are white potatoes that exist. So are carrots. By the way, if you can't get a kid to eat a vegetable, but you can get them to eat one, which vegetable do kids eat? Why? Feed them a lollipop, same stuff. You're like, oh, Bugs Bunny, it's a carrot, it's great, it's just a carrot. It comes out of the ground, it's nature, it's good. It's highly glycemic. By the way, do you see that carrots have a glycemic index of 92? What does honey have? Would you sit a kid down to a bunch of sticks of honey and go, oh, that's such a good dinner, I got them. They had to put ranch dressing on the honey, but I got them to eat the honey. Cornflakes, whole wheat bread, white rice. This is the high glycemic. Raisins. I know beets, all of these are high glycemic, full of sugar. By the way, you start getting into moderate glycemic areas. Look at sweet potato, kind of right in the middle. So you still like that texture and you still like the thing about it. Have it, but do it in the sweet potato form. And by the way, move your way down into the lower glycemic areas. Now, if this is starting to sound very paleo-esque to you, it is. Because if you really ate mostly protein, vegetarian or animal sources of it, and lots of vegetables, guess what? Your glycemic index would be relatively low, as long as your vegetable choices were more towards the medium to low glycemic area. Now, if you're eating, even as a vegetarian, if you're eating a lot of tofu and you're eating a ton of carrots and white potatoes, your glycemic index will be the same as a person just guzzling honey or soda pop. Same stuff. You can eat whatever style suits your constitution, your philosophy, your orientation, but adapt it to a lower glycemic pattern of eating. There are low glycemic diets. In fact, this guy Atkins was totally castigated by modern medicine because basically he had this hyperbole of a diet out there, which basically said, wake up and have lots of bacon, eat as much fat as you possibly can, don't really eat any sugar at all. In fact, buy some urine strips and measure when ketones are spilling out, which means you're basically robbing the body of sugar so much that it is beginning to pull sugar out of the fat of your body, and you're going to do better. By the way, they did do better. Their cholesterol improved, their triglyceride improved in the Atkins diet. Everybody lost weight. I don't know that it was a really rational, sane diet, but from a principle, he was the first guy to have said, eat in a low glycemic fashion. The South Beach diet, the paleo diet, the blood sugar solution, which I actually like the best right now, and that's Mark Hyman's diet. Very good practical approaches to low glycemic eating. There are high glycemic diets. Avoid these. Your low-fat diets are typically high glycemic. Do you remember the box of Pop-Tarts? That's low-fat. Just because it says low-fat doesn't mean that it's going to be good for you. Juice fasting. You might think it's really great for you, but juice is basically what? Sugar. You've taken all of the fiber that slows the release of sugar, and you're essentially taking that fiber out and mainlining pure sugar. Yes, there's enzymes there, but so what? You're basically screwing up your body to get a few extra enzymes. Doesn't make any sense. And when you take these fad diets like the grapefruit diet or the this diet or the that, they're mostly very, very high glycemic diets that rarely have a long-lasting effect. And then ultimately there's the fasting diet. Now the fasting diet isn't a diet at all. It's the anti-diet. It's the caloric equation diet. Basically, I'm going to fast and I'm going to lose 16 pounds. I fasted for the week. Look how wonderful I feel. That's the same thing as that caloric equation. The metabolism goes lower and lower and lower. There's no food going in, and then ultimately you start eating again with a low metabolism, and what happens to your weight? Goes right through the roof. Doesn't make sense for a sustainable diet. How do you treat the insulin resistance that might be there besides a low glycemic diet? There are a variety of supplements that soften the insulin receptors. There are a variety of supplements that act like WD-40 in the locks. It allows the keys of insulin to get in and to move better. Coenzyme Q10, alpha-lipoic acid, a form of chromium called GTF, or glucose tolerance factor chromium, cinnamon, bitter melon, gymnema, other herbs that are spices that are very helpful at softening these insulin receptors. And lastly, participate in one of my favorite spins on any form of exercise, which is interval training. What it essentially says is, regardless of whatever you like to do, whether you like to walk, or whether you like to run, or if you like to be on the elliptical, or you like to swim, or do yoga, whatever you like to do it in bursts. My favorite pattern is essentially to start out with a recovery pace. Let's say we're walking together. We're walking along for a few minutes, and then we burst together as fast as we can walk for 1 minute. We go back to the recovery pace for another few minutes until we recover, burst again for a minute. Come back again, and I like 5 of these with my patients in succession. Burst, recover, burst, recover, burst, recover for 5 of them, and then you're done. It's really a very effective way of changing, causing plasticity, movability in the insulin receptors. And what it does is you're moving between an anaerobic, which means a place where your body is a little bit starved of oxygen, to an aerobic threshold. So you're moving back and forth, and it has a very advantageous effect on the body and its metabolism. The 5th element that often goes off in individuals is called a cellular energy deficit. And to understand a cellular energy deficit, we've got to kind of piece the body together a little bit. We're made up basically of chemicals, and those chemicals ultimately come together as molecules, which make cells, which makes tissues, which makes organs, which makes bigger organ systems, and boink, a human being is there. But we have to trace our way all the way back to the cellular level. Our building blocks of humanness inside of us, the life force inside of us. And when we open up one of these cells, they're filled with a bunch of gushy stuff. And the gushy stuff that is most interesting on an energy point of view is called the mitochondria. Will everybody say that word with me? Mitochondria. The mitochondria are the small energy-producing power plants inside of every cell. This is not the human body in totality. This is every cell. This is a skin cell, or a brain cell, or a heart cell, or a muscle cell. Every cell, except for blood cells, have mitochondria associated with them. Inside of these mitochondria are very fancy chemical processes, but I just want you to know that the food that you put in your body eventually gets into the mitochondria. The glucose, if you don't have a problem with insulin resistance, gets into the cell and eventually is biotransformed inside the mitochondria into energy. This is where energy happens. There's a part of the mitochondria where the most amount of energy is produced. It's the most sensitive part of your energy-producing plant. And if you looked at that, the number one constituent that is essential is oxygen. If you do not provide the body enough regular oxygen, full, deep amounts of oxygen to every cell, you will slow your cellular metabolic rate down. Doesn't get any simpler than that. How well does a fire burn without oxygen? It won't burn at all. That's how you put a fire out. Stick a blanket on it. What are you really doing? You're starving the fire of oxygen. How do we carry oxygen in the body? We carry it on red blood cells. You cut yourself open and it's gooeying and red and dripping. The redness are these cells that are carrying oxygen in our body. And many of us are anemic. We either don't have enough of these cells or they're of very poor quality. And many physicians aren't looking deeply enough into these cells to try to discern if we're really carrying enough oxygen in our body. So my suggestion to you, if you suspect that there's a problem, is to try to understand first, hey, am I fatigued? Many people are. Do I have overall weakness? Like, I know I could be stronger, but I get up a few stairs and I'm like, man, my legs are really weak. You might have pale skin. You might have a fast or irregular heartbeat. That's the body trying to compensate for these irregularities in oxygen flow. You might have shortness of breath, even when doing something relatively innocuous. Or worse, you might have chest pain showing that the heart is really starved for oxygen. You might demonstrate dizziness or cognitive problems or cold hands and feet or headaches. Look at categories 3, look at categories 8, look at category 13. These are your big ones associated with cellular energy deficits. These are your big ones associated with problems where your individual cells, the power plants inside of them, the mitochondria, are not getting enough oxygen. Now, how do you know this for sure? One thing you could do is just stick an oxygen saturation meter. Your doctor has one in their office. You may buy one, on Amazon.com. They're really inexpensive. They're easy to measure. See what your oxygen saturation level is. I get concerned about individuals when it starts getting into the low 90s, upper 80s. You may be hanging out there. Your oxygen saturation should be 97, 98, 99% most of the time. Have your blood do a complete blood count and not only check iron levels, but check for something called ferritin. Ferritin is your deep storage of iron. Oftentimes we will have sufficient iron in the blood, but not sufficient iron stores known as ferritin. And that is a source of anemia. That needs to be treated. You need iron when you have a low ferritin level. And also measure whether there is something called oxidative stress. Measure whether there are substances, sophisticated substances like cysteine or glucose, glutathione, lipid peroxide, sulfates, your total antioxidant capacity. Look at these things to see whether there's a damage that may be occurring on the cell structure itself. That damage could be damaging the mechanism that uses oxygen. So you might have enough oxygen and might have enough iron. You might be breathing really well and exercising really well, but because your mitochondria are being damaged due to what's called oxidative stress, inner body rust, inner chemicals, free radicals, you could be really amping down your individual metabolism. How do you treat? Well, number one, get oxygen in there. If you're not doing regular exercise like interval training or specialized breathing techniques, I love yoga because a key element of yoga all the time is breath. We're always in classes being encouraged, breathe deeper, breathe this way, take a big breath in, hold the big breath, let it out. We're moving our breath in a very controlled manner. That's called pranayama in yoga. But basically it means breath control. We're learning to have breath control. And I love the fact that if you look at the original Sanskrit of the word pranayama, prana means energy. It's really not breath control, it's energy control. We learn to move energy by breathing better. And then there are supplements. A form of iron that I love to use to bring up deep deficient iron stores that are showing in low ferritin levels are iron bisglycinate, B6 or B12 if there's an anemia that indicates that that's an issue. Use a specialized form of folic acid called 5-MT HF, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. Use L-carnitine, malic acid, taurine, R-lipoic acid, glutathione, or coenzyme Q10 to make the cells use more oxygen. Make those mitochondria function for you. Breathe and make the energy-producing parts of your body work for you. And lastly, consider whether, if you're a woman, there's something called estrogen dominance. Now, we've got two basic female hormones. Now, men have these hormones too, but I don't see estrogen dominance in men, but I do see it a lot in women. There are many estrogenic effects inside of the body, including it building up the uterine lining, but it does increase excess body fat. Estrogen causes depression and headaches and migraines. It interferes with thyroid hormone. It increases blood clotting. It decreases libido. It impairs your blood glucose and increases the risk of endometrial cancer and increases the risk of breast cancer. Doesn't sound like a great hormone to me. And it's not to your body either. It manufactures estrogen in a relatively small amount. Progesterone, on the other hand, maintains the uterine lining and helps to use fat for energy, key. It's an antidepressant. It facilitates the role of thyroid hormone. It normalizes blood clotting, restores libido, normalizes your blood sugar level, protects you from endometrial cancer, and is a probable prevention for breast cancer. That's why your body normally has a progesterone level that is 200 times higher than your estrogen level when you're healthy. Now, I measure this in women all the time, and that's not a very frequent presentation when when a woman has a problem known as estrogen dominance. Throughout the cycle, estrogen and progesterone go up and down. But when you look at a very specific part of the cycle, typically day 19 to 21, your progesterone level should be about 100 to 200 times higher than your estrogen level, way down here. In adulthood, the ovaries are producing progesterone, and they're making the available progesterone in the body. But as you move into menopause, the ovaries retire and go to Florida. The majority of your hormones are manufactured in your, thinking about zebras now, in your adrenal glands. Now, if you've just spent the last 40 years wearing out your adrenal glands, and you're ready to go into menopause, and now you say to your adrenals, look, I know I've given you a little bit to deal with, but right now, I'd like you to start manufacturing all the progesterone that I need for the rest of my life. Go. And they go, sorry, I want to go to Florida too. I don't really even know what I'm doing. If that is the sole organ producing the majority of your progesterone after menopause, and you've not treated your adrenal glands well, sorry, you really have to, because there's nothing left. Your ovaries aren't going to do it. They just worked for 40 years to manufacture all of this progesterone and estrogen for you. That's why we have to take good care of the adrenal glands. Now, there's this big controversy about the molecule of cholesterol. By the way, did you know that all of the progesterone, all of the estrogen, all of the testosterone, everything comes from cholesterol? So why in the world would we be wanting to drive total cholesterol levels down in people? I have no idea. You need cholesterol. However, we want this to work well. We want cholesterol to create progesterone. We want cholesterol to produce estrogen. You see this little molecule down here? It's called cortisol. Zebras. When your body is making a ton of cortisol, how well does it make progesterone and estrogen? It doesn't. It can't do it. Therefore, you start to develop all of the signs and symptoms of estrogen dominance. It doesn't mean your estrogen is too high. It means that there is more estrogen than is being opposed by the proper amount of progesterone. That ratio is off. What should be 100 to 200 times might be 20, might be 5, might be 30, but it isn't a nice high level of the ratio of progesterone to estrogen. You see, the goal isn't to get you postmenopausally to some mysterious number of progesterone and estrogen. The goal is to get you balanced for you. When you're balanced for you, your body starts to function better. When it's not balanced and you're premenopausal, you'll have PMS, you'll have migraines, you'll have menstrual disturbances, maybe fibrocystic breast disease, maybe ovarian cysts or uterine fibroids, breast cancer, hot flashes, or night sweats as you start to move into menopause. Look at your categories 18, look at the category 19, figure out pre or postmenopausal if you have this grouping of symptoms. How do you know for sure? Measure in blood, or I prefer saliva, because I'm looking for free hormones again. Can't tell you how many women come in and say, my doctor measured my progesterone and estrogen, and it's fine. You have hot flashes? Mm-hmm. Have you had fibrocystic breast disease? Mm-hmm. Any surgeries? Oh yeah, I had my uterus taken out. Okay, why? Why'd you have to think about that so long? Why did you do that? Well, there was this fibroids. Yeah, I had uterine, and you go down the list and you're like, clearly there's a problem with insufficient progesterone relative to estrogen. But if you measure it in blood, you're going to miss it. You'll miss it. Measure the hormones, total versus free. Measure progesterone, one of the estrogens especially called E2, and some of the other associated hormones called DHEA and testosterone. How do you treat this? One of the best ways to treat it is to initially supplement with some form of hormone. Now, your doctor can give you synthetic hormones. I'm not a big fan. I don't think your liver needs more work to do with something that it's not used to dealing with. You can use hormones that travel across the skin, transdermal hormones. One of them is called a form is called bioidentical, but there's a more direct, natural, mild approach, which is an organic, plant-based transdermal, and I prefer to use that with patients. Also, you can use herbs from nature. Chasteberry is a phenomenal herb to cause a rebalancing of progesterone relative to estrogen. Milk thistle helps the liver to metabolize hormones better. And if your estrogen is still just soaring and you can't bring it down, there's a molecule called DIM that helps to gently bring the estrogen level down, allowing normal amounts of progesterone to rise. And of course, be good zebras and support your adrenal glands. Ultimately, you can support the body through all of this and bring it back into its normal function. When we look at these 6 areas, when we treat these 6 areas, and when your body gets into its normal balance, you start to come into your normal balance. Now, that doesn't mean when you look in the mirror, you're going to see yourself as you truly are. And it also doesn't mean that you're going to like what you see, because we've got this really distorted body image thing going on, especially in our Western culture. We celebrate anorexia. We celebrate this heroin chic. We celebrate some amount of emaciated thinness and have created a mass hypnosis through all of this advertising that that's what's attractive. It's not what's attractive. What's attractive is who you are being healthy. That's what makes all of us, men and women, attractive to one another. How do you know if your body image, the way that you're seeing yourself, is off, that might be also something that needs to be addressed? If you find yourself excessively scrutinizing yourself in a mirror, it may be an issue. If you're thinking disparaging comments about your own body on a routine basis, that may be a sign of an impaired body image. If you're frequently comparing yourself, your shape and size, to that of friends or family members or celebrities, that could be an issue. How do you cultivate a healthy body image? First of all, start focusing on what you like. Find something. Find something you like about the way that you look and the way that you're functioning. Start celebrating diversity. Look around you. There isn't a beauty. We're all beautiful. We have this unique beauty among us. Start to celebrate it among lots and lots of different physical expressions of beauty. Ultimately, exercise, not because it's going to make you into something that's in a magazine, but because it's going to make your brain function better. The more oxygen that's there, we'll feel better about ourselves and those around us. And start to notice when you're hyper-focusing or when you're narrowing your vision, and try to break that habit. Try to move past that. And try to observe when there's self-commentary. You can't stop it. When you're starting to be critical about yourself, you can't stop it, but you can say, oh, there I am, I'm being critical about myself. There was an amazing, psychiatrist, he started out as a plastic surgeon. His name was Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And his story is really fascinating because he began to do plastic surgery and found an extraordinarily large number of his patients, despite having whatever their physical form changed that they wanted to have changed. When he brought them back in after the bandages were off, after everything healed, and after they looked what he believed to be the way that they asked to look, they would look in the mirror and say, my nose is still big, my face is too fat, my cheeks are too slumpy, my breasts aren't big enough, my waist is too... He was slack-jawed, that this would happen over and over and over again. And he stopped his practice not because it was ineffective. He was a great plastic surgeon. He stopped his practice because ultimately he recognized that individuals and how they viewed themselves was much more of an influencer on them than anything he could ever do physically. And he went about with a large amount of really well-designed self-help treatises. One of them, and I think it was in the 60s or the 70s, which started to proclaim the value of looking at yourself differently. And I love his ultimate quote. that I wanted to share with you. He said that you accept yourself as you are. Otherwise, you'll never see opportunity, you'll never feel free to move toward it, and you'll feel you are not deserving. This is kind of the key dilemma of humanity, where we don't really think high thoughts about ourselves. And that extends out to being critical about other individuals, and we tend to feel like we're not deserving at all. We have explored today everything from the understanding of these 6 basic principles of how the body's metabolism goes off, how we can ultimately understand each of these for us in a very personal way. How do we use the symptom survey that I gave you to suspect whether there's a problem? Ultimately, to know yourself, fill this out. You've got to take the first step. Fill it out. Figure out for yourself if there are some problem areas. Ultimately, how do you know? Take the information tonight, take the information that is contained that I've given you, and take it to your doctor. Partner with a physician to perform some of these selected tests. Your knowledge of yourself is going to bring tremendous confidence. It's going to tell you really when there's an issue and how you can go about addressing it. And ultimately, you can start to monitor it and see that you're making progress. The majority of us move through life as these big icebergs. I love the analogy because we're busy like having these symptoms that kind of pop up out of the surface of the water. And the bigger issue is what's beneath. We might come in with diabetes or cancer or heart disease or being overweight, but ultimately the problems are underneath the surface and they're much bigger. They need to be addressed more centrally. To end this evening, and my deepest appreciation for your attention and your time in staying with some pretty heady material. You all did really awesome. I'm going back to Maxwell Maltz because the guy's amazing. If you make friends with yourself, you will never, ever, ever be alone. Thank you so much.